Well, here you are, Economic Systems Screencast. What are you going to be learning? Well, here are a few things that I want you to know by the end of this screencast. I want you to pay attention to, first of all, what is an economic system? Second of all is I want you to know that there are three economic questions that all societies must answer, and from those three questions, that's really the basis for understanding how these different economic systems differ from one another. There happens to be four of them, and we're going to look at them, and I'll explain some advantages and disadvantages, and I'll even go into a little bit of detail about which countries lie on which type of economic system. So let's get started. So, what is an economic system? Well, plain and simple. As you see on the screen, an economic system, it describes how a country's economy is organized. It's organized because it has to address the fundamental economic question and concern about scarcity and how it impacts that economic system. So remember, scarcity is you don't have enough of something. So that means every single economic system in the nation, in the world, has three questions that they must answer. Here they are, the three economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Because we have scarce resources, we have to make choices. And so these are the three questions that we're going to really touch upon in this screencast. So here we go. You ready? There are four types of economic systems: traditional, a command, a market, and a mixed. Now, a mixed economy, as you see, is a blend between a market and a command. Here's the first economic system, a traditional economy. Keep in mind that in this particular economy, this is where tradition and customs will govern their economic decisions. So these activities that they conduct on a daily basis are really centered around the family, a tribe, or an ethnic group. So farming and hunting and gathering they're done largely in the same fashion as the generation before them. And so really their choices are going to be determined by the environment around them. So there's also very little technology that will be used. One thing to note is that they will be exchanging their goods and services through a bartering system. So really not a lot of money will be exchanging hands. So how do they answer those three questions that I talked about earlier? The what to produce, the how to produce, and for whom to produce. And plain and simple, as you can see, what are they producing? Well, they're going to be producing goods and services for the people based upon their customs and based upon what their ancestors have made. How do they produce it? They're going to be growing it the same way that they've done as their ancestors have done it. And for whom do these goods and services get produced for? They get produced for the people in the village who need them, so kept very locally. Some examples of traditional economies in the world is that there are villages in Africa and South America, Inuit tribes up in Canada, the caste system in parts of rural India, and the Aborigines in Australia. What are some positives or advantages of a traditional economy? Well, it's predictable. You know what your job is, you know your way of life, there's little friction among members because there's no competition, essentially. Your roles are going to be clearly defined, and you've got a system that's generally well understood by everybody. On the flip side, some of the problems or disadvantages with a traditional economy is that they lack many resources and they really only produce enough to live on. And so there's not a lot of growth. The changes are going to be pretty slow. Very little social mobility because your role is going to be determined by your birth. Doesn't take advantage of any technology, and individuals really don't have any control over their environmental factors, so they're at the mercy, in a sense, of Mother Nature. The second economic system is something called a command economy. And in a command economy, this is where the government or other central authority is going to be making the economic decisions. The individuals in that economy have little, if any, influence over the economic functions. The resources within that economic system are owned by the government, not the people. There's no competition. The purpose of business is to provide goods and services, not to make a profit. Factories are concerned with quotas, and a quota is essentially a fixed number that is determined by a central planning agency that says we're going to make X amount of computers this year. The consumers have very few choices, if any, in the marketplace, and this government, for a command economy, will set the prices of these goods and services. Something to note is that this system has not been very successful in the long run, and more countries have been abandoning it. So let's go over those three economic questions. What to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So in a command economy, it's the government that's making the economic decisions for what to produce. It's the government that will also be deciding how to make these goods and services. And it's whomever the government decides to give these goods and services to. That's for whom these goods and services go to. You're going to find that countries with a communist government have command economies. Some examples of command economies are North Korea, the former Soviet Union, and in Cuba. Some of the positives of a command economy or advantages is that because the government is making all these decisions, people living in that economy don't have to worry about jobs, housing, education, healthcare. There's a tremendous amount of stability, and therefore the businesses don't go through a lot of cycles, meaning ups and downs. It serves a collective people, so instead of an individual, so in a sense it's going to be focusing on equality. It will distribute wealth among all in the society, and the products that are being produced usually fulfill needs. So not a lot of excess, in other words. Some of the problems with the command economy is that because consumers are getting low priority, there's really not a lot of choice, not a lot of quality with the products, and there's little, as I mentioned, little freedom of choice. So because these resources are all owned by the government, there's really no incentive for innovation. And because that power is concentrated at a central government, it can often lead to corruption among state planners. And furthermore, is that they don't easily adjust to change because it is so planned out that the economy is pretty tight. The third economic system is called a market economy. Interestingly enough, a market economy is on the other side of the spectrum from the command economy. So this is where there's going to be a lot of choice, and that the resources are owned by the private citizens. Prices are going to be determined by market forces, and there's going to be competition, and there's a lot of adjustment to change, very little government intervention, a great variety of goods and services. So it's a very open economy. Those economic questions that I've been talking about, that these are going to be answered by an individual, the individuals, and it's not being answered by the government. So let's look at those. What's being produced in a market economy? Well, businesses. Businesses are going to decide what is being produced based upon supply and demand. How is it going to be produced? Well, the business is going to decide once again. The government's not stepping in to tell that business how to produce it. And for whom are these goods and services being produced for? Well, for you and I, for consumers. So whoever demands it will be the one that will buy the product. One thing you should note is that there was no pure command economy. There's really no truly pure market economy, but if you had to say which country was closest to a market economy, you could say that the United States is pretty close. Some of the positive things about a market economy is that people get to start their own business and that they have choice. And prices are going to be determining what is going to be supplied in the marketplace. So, as I mentioned, there's very little government intervention in a market economy, and there's a great variety of goods and services. So capital is going to flow where it's going to get the greatest return, as businesses are going to be incentivized by profit. Some of the problems, though, in a market economy is that as businesses are driven by profit, their desire to make more money may mean that they're cutting some corners, which could lead to poor quality of goods and services. And on the flip side, though, business owners have to risk losing money. So there are definitely some downsides to being in a market economy, such as sometimes basic services are not being provided, and so people can slip into poverty. It can also be difficult for a government to provide adequate social services. So people can make choices, and that's a good thing for many people, but sometimes those choices could also be harmful to themselves and to others. So the fourth and the last type of economic system is called a mixed economy, and this is a blend between a market and a command. And it essentially combines the elements of a pure market and a command economy, so government and individuals share the economic decision-making process. And it's the government that's going to be guiding and regulating the production of goods and services. Most of the time, the resources are owned by individuals, and the government is there to protect both the producers and the consumers from unfair policies and practices. So just like we saw in the market economy for the three economic questions, what's being produced? Well, businesses are going to decide that. How is it being produced? Once again, businesses, but the government's going to regulate certain industries. And are the goods and services being produced for? Being produced for consumers. Most democratic countries fall into this category, so places like the United States, Canada, Australia, Mexico, Brazil are some examples of some countries that have mixed economies. So some of the positives, advantages of a mixed economy is that there's private ownership of businesses, they protect the citizens and the workers because of the government regulations, and they also have protections on the environment. One of the biggest problems with the mixed economy is that government interventions can sometimes prevent profits for companies, and that might lead to an unoptimal use of these resources and therefore hinder progress within the. So here's the continuum of economic systems. On the left-hand side, you'll see there's pure command, meaning no individual freedoms, governments controlling everything. And on the right-hand side is a pure market, and this is where most individuals have a tremendous amount of freedom. And countries are going to fall generally somewhere along this spectrum. So let's take a look at some examples. On the left-hand side, we can place countries such as Cuba towards the command side, same with Russia. And as you move more towards the market side, this is where you're going to see countries such as Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and Australia. You might ask yourself, well, which economic system is best? Well, it really depends on your perspective. Some people say market systems because it is a more open, it promotes freedom and choice and growth and efficiency. And others may say, no, we need things planned the way things have always been. It's better when it's overseen by a central planning committee. So really, a lot of it just depends on your perspective. So there you have it, economic systems in a nutshell. This closes the screencast. Now you can move on to the next item in this module.